Alright, we'll say good morning. Let's begin. So today's daf is Kuf Tes Vav in Parakesh Nochlin. So we are picking up at the top of Kuf Tes Vav. So as I remember again, we were actually in the middle of a really fascinating discussion regarding the mother's ability to inherit her son. So remember again, the Gemara quoted the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, I should say differently. Rabbi Yochanan, who said in the name of Rabbi Huda ben Rabbi Shimon that Dvar Torah av yorish es bino, v'isha yoreshes es bino. So first of all, our share this morning is dedicated by Yerachmiel and Judy Noodleman in memory of Yerachmiel's beloved father Yaakov ben Moshe Tzvi. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the Neshama will have an aliyah in the family in a chama. Thank you. So we'll say, so we had this statement by Rabbi Yochanan, namely that Dvar Torah mid'oraisa, a mother inherits her son. A mother inherits her children. Obviously, this is about in the absence of the father, the mother inherits her children. So we'll say with that, we start on literally the first word on Kuf Tes Vav Amud Aleph. Esvei. So Esvei Rabbi Yochanan Rabbi Huda. So we'll say here's the problem. The Gemara raised the kasha. How can you say that a mother inherits her son? After all, we learned in the Mishnah, Ha'isha es bina, Va'isha es baila, Va'chiahem, Manchilin v'lo nochlin. But also we learned explicitly in the Mishnah that when it comes to a mother and her son, or a wife and her husband, or the brothers of the sister, manchilin, all of these people ultimately bequeath v'lo nochlin, but they do not inherit. So the Mishnah tells me explicitly that although when a mother dies, she bequeaths her property ultimately to her sons, right? But at the end of the day, the sons do not inherit the mother. So how could Rabbi Yochanan say name Rabbi Yehuda? How could Rabbi Yochanan say? How could Rabbi Yehuda ben Reb Shimon say? I'm getting my names mixed up. That a mother is able to inherit her son. To which the Gemara he responds back to him, Mishnah Seinu Eini Yodea Mishana. So this is actually quite interesting. So he says, I don't know who went ahead and taught our Mishnah. I don't know who the author of the Mishnah is. So in other words, what he's saying is, I'm not sure, but it could be that the Mishnah ultimately, again, is profoundly flawed. So we'll say, I have a simple fix. Why don't you say that the Mishnah reflects the view of Rabbi Zechariah ben Akatzov? Remember again, Rabbi Zechariah ben Akatzov was the one who did not darshan matos. Now remember again the drasha of matos, that was Kof Yud Aleph Amud Aleph. Now remember again, by the pasuk of a daughter inheriting. So the way that the Torah set it up is that the daughter is inheriting portions from her mother and her father. The Torah uses lashon of matos, which Rabbosai the Gemara understood to equate the inheritance of the father and the inheritance of the mother. So says the Gemara, so maybe this whole conversation only gets started if you accept that equation or that equality between matos, between inheritance of the father and inheritance of the mother. But Rabbi Zechariah ben Akatzov doesn't make that drasha, and therefore again maybe according to him the Mishnah works. To which the Gemara says, no, I'll tell you why. The Mishnah does not reflect the view of Rabbi Zechariah ben Akatzov for the following reason. Diktani ubnei achos. Because I will say, remember again, the Mishnah spoke about the case of the sons of daughters. Remember this case where ultimately again a man dies, his closest surviving relatives are sisters. If one of those sisters inherits and the sister dies, her son ends up inheriting her property. So the Mishnah pointed out that there's a case of where you could have nephews inheriting an uncle. Okay, we're not going to go back through it again, but we've dealt with that extensively. The Tana, and we learned about that case, B'nei Achos, v'lo B'nos Achos. And I will say we specifically said about that case that what? That this is a din that applies to nephews, but does not apply to nieces. So the Gemara says, Va'amrina l'may hilchasa. What does that mean? I will say what it meant is that l'maysa nephews will take precedence over nieces in this particular scenario. And if you think that our Mishnah reflects the view of Rabbi Zechariah ben Akatzov, ha'amar echad haben ve'echad habas shavim b'nichseim. Rabbi Zechariah ben Akatzov was of the opinion that what? That sons and daughters share equally in the estate or in the inheritance of a mother. That although everyone agrees that sons take precedence over daughters when it comes to Yerusha Sa'ab, when it comes to the Yerusha ultimately again of the father, Rabbi Zechariah ben Akatzev has the very novel idea that when it comes to the Nachalo, when it comes to the inheritance of the mother, so sons and daughters share equally. So we'll say because of that, therefore what? Rabbi Zechariah ben Akatzev would say that in a case where a woman inherits from her brother and then dies, that property would be divided, and that's the Yerusha. That property would be equally divided amongst the sons and the daughters. As such, again, it would not, therefore, again, this statement or this Mishnah would ultimately not work according to Rabbi Zechariah ben Akatzev. Also, just remember again, as we said before, we don't paskin that way. We paskin that the laws of Yerusha by the father and the mother are effectively the same. In other words, just like a son takes precedence over a daughter by the Yerusha of the father, a son takes precedence over a daughter by the Yerusha of the mother, with one exception, which was what? Pishnayim, right? No double portion. Whereas the son gets a double portion ultimately in the inheritance of his father, he does not get Pishnayim in the inheritance of his mother. V'tana didan b'manavshach. So we'll say, so still, let's analyze again ultimately whose opinion the Mishnah reflects. I darish matos. So we'll say, if the Tana of the Mishnah darshins matos, remember what does it mean to darshan matos? If you darshan matos, what you are doing is you are equating ultimately again the inheritance of the mother with the inheritance of the father. So if you darshan matos, mimanavshach, then ultimately again a woman should be able to inherit her son. Because also remember, if you darshan matos, what does that do? That links paternal inheritance with maternal inheritance. And therefore the same way I would say that a son inherits his mother, same way that a son inherits his father, he inherits his mother, and conversely, the same way that a father could inherit a son, a mother could also inherit her son. Ilo darish matos, but I will say at the end of the day we don't darshan matos, in other words, we don't make that equation ultimately again between paternal inheritance and maternal inheritance, then ben dekodem labas then how do we know that a son would take precedence in maternal inheritance over his daughter? To which the Gemara says, the olam darish matos. In reality, we do darshan matos, which means is we link paternal inheritance with maternal inheritance. So why doesn't the mother inherit her son? The shayniach da amakra. Because we will say the pasuk when speaking about a woman inheriting says that what happens? Yoreshes ve'ina moreshes. But it teaches us that a daughter has the ability to inherit from her mother, but does not have the ability to bequeath to her mother. So we'll say, so bottom line, the way we paskin is that although we accept this drasha of matos, right, to equate maternal inheritance and paternal inheritance, but that equation of the that equality between the inheritances has certain limitations. What does it accomplish for us? It tells us that just as sons and daughters inherit the father, sons and daughters inherit the mother. It tells us that just as the son takes precedence by the father, son takes precedence by the mother. It tells us that although Pishnayim double portion applies by the father, it doesn't apply by the mother. And even though, again, I would have been tempted to say that based on this drasha, I would say the same way that a father inherits a son, a mother could inherit a daughter. When the Torah speaks about, again, a woman inheriting, which again is in the context of the daughter, the Torah makes it clear that although she has the ability to inherit her mother, she does not have the ability to bequeath property to her mother, and that is the limitation on her Yerusha. So I'll say, so bottom line, the way we paskin is that ultimately, again, a mother will not inherit her children. So I'll say, so just to close out this sugya, so I'll just read you the interesting halacha l'maisa. So the Shulchan Aruch in Choshen Mishpat, Hilchos Nachlos, Siman Reish Ayin Vav Sif Dalid, writes the following, an interesting opening. Mishpachas ha'em eina kruya mishpacha. Right? The maternal family is not called family. Rabbi say, now what does that mean? Maternal family is not called family. It means that from a halachic perspective, Rabbi say, again, the definition of mishpacha, when Torah speaks about mishpacha family, it's referring to father's family. Therefore, again, she'ein ha'em yoreshes es bina v'lo es bita. A mother does not inherit her daughter. A mother does not inherit her son. Va'achin me'em v'lo me'av en yorshin zezer. So we're going to see this in the next Mishnah. Similarly, again, if the relationship between brothers is only maternal and not paternal, ultimately, again, they do not inherit one another as well. Rather, again, ela kol echad mishpachas avev yorshos. Okay, so Shulchan Aruch Shach goes on over here, he brings down. But again, bottom line, I will say, for our purposes, is that Lamaisa, again, although a mother is inherited by her sons and daughters, a mother does not inherit neither her son nor her daughter. We'll say, let's go weiter now. New Mishnah. Kuf Tesvav Amud Aleph. So we'll say, it's actually, you're going to chuckle a little bit, because you're going to read this Mishnah and you're going to say to yourself, oh my gosh, if only I had this Mishnah at the beginning of Yesh Nochlim, life would have been a lot easier. Why? Look how the Mishnah begins. Seder Nachalos Kachu. We're going to begin now to go through the order. What is the proper order, ultimately, again, of inheritance? So here in the Mishnah, we've spent all of this time trying to figure out the proper order of inheritance lines, and here the Mishnah spells it out pretty explicitly. So Seder Nachalos Kachu. So we'll say here is the order of inheritance. Ish kiyamos ubein lo v'avartem es nachalos lebito. So we'll say, so here's what's interesting. Remember, the Torah never says explicitly that if a man dies, his son inherits him. Torah makes that statement. What the Torah does is bring down a number of other types of cases through which we infer. So, for example, the Torah by, let's say, right after, in Parshas Kiseitze, right after the Yifas Toar, right, the war bride. So Torah talks about again that if you have two sons, and ultimately again you like the younger one better than you like the older one, lo yuchal levaker, you can't pass over the other, which clearly indicates to us that a son is inheriting his father. Interestingly enough, the source pasuk for this, the Mishnah chooses, is by a daughter. The pasuk says, "Ish ki yamusu beinei lo." If a man dies and he doesn't have a son, so what do you do if he doesn't have a son? You will give the inheritance to his daughter. So I'll say, so what do you learn from that? That a son is the primary inheritor. It's just an interesting idea, because the Torah says if there's no son, you give it to the daughter, which tells me that if there is a son gets it. So the Gemara, so the Mishnah says, Bain kodem labas. So also what that teaches us is that a son comes before the daughter for inheritance purposes. Similarly, the Mishnah says, Bain kodem labas, kol yotze yirecho shel ben, kodem labas. Now, both saying, now this is actually exceptionally dramatic. What this means is the following. Then not only, so let's just play this out for just a moment. Yaakov dies, he leaves behind a son and a daughter, Ruvain and Dinah. What happens? So obviously Yaakov dies. Mishnah is telling me Ruvain is a first position inheritor. Watch this. Let's say Ruvain has children of his own. Ruvain predeceases his father. So Ruvain dies before Yaakov. Yaakov then dies. So we'll say, where does Yerusha go? So one would have thought that's what? Where does Yerusha go? To the daughter. Because now Lamais, again, she's next line. Kamash on the Mishnah says, no. What happens is the son's power to inherit is not just limited to him, but it extends down to his generations as well. So therefore, again, if Ruvain leaves offspring, then ultimately, again, that offspring inherits before Ruvain's sister Dinah. So offspring of the son, children of the son, in other words, grandchildren that came from the son of the deceased, inherit before the daughters of the deceased. I'm sorry? So go. We're going to see how far it goes. So the Gemara says, Kol yotzei recho shel ben, kol dun las. Now obviously that's a very expansive statement. All of the offspring, right? All of the offspring of the son ultimately again come before the daughter in terms of precedence of inheritance. So we'll say, so that's our first level. Son comes before daughter, kol yotzei yerecho, all the offspring of the son come before the daughter as well. Bas kodemes la'achin. So we'll say ultimately again, a daughter comes before brothers. Take a look at the Rashbam for just a moment. It's in the wide lines, about 3 lines in. So the Gemara says, so first of all, take a look at the previous Rashbam. Ben kodem labas, Ruven kodem ledina achoso, liyaresh es Yaakov, v'chein kol yotzi yerecho shel Ruven, emes Ruven kodem ledina achoso, liyaresh es Yaakov, go mes Ruven chanoch beno kodem ledina, liyaresh nichse Yaakov, uben shel chanoch, v'chein beno ad 1000 dar, kulan kodem ledina. So we'll say the Rashbam literally says, again, although we'll see it later on in the Gemara, that when we say that the son and his offspring come before Dinah, we'll say as many generations down from Ruvain, always precede, as long as they're direct descendants of Ruvain, will always precede Dinah, the daughter, in the inheritance law. Next case, Bas Kodem La'achim, take a look at the next Rashbam, V'myesh Av Lemeis Gam Lo Kodemes. So we'll say, so what does this mean that a daughter comes before brothers? So let's say again, Ruvain dies, but Ruvain leaves behind, Yaakov dies, and Yaakov has a brother. We'll call him Esav. Yaakov has a brother. So what's the halacha Rabosai? That when there is, let's say Reuven dies, no son, he has a brother and a daughter. So who takes precedence for Yerusha? So a daughter goes out and takes precedence over brothers of the deceased. So the Gemara goes weiter. I'm sorry. Similarly, Rabosai, let's say again, in this case, Dina, the daughter, has offspring. So kodmin la'achin. So the offspring of the daughter also come before the brothers of the deceased. So the Gemara says, Achin, brothers of the deceased, kodmin la'achei. So brothers of the deceased come before brothers of, we'll call them, I guess, paternal uncles. Paternal uncles. So we'll say, so again, just to illustrate this. So remember again, you have Reuven, Yaakov is the father. Yaakov is the father. So what happens? So Yaakov dies. Yaakov leaves behind a brother, Esav. Yaakov also has a father, Yitzchak. Right? Yitzchak also has a brother, Yishmael. So, just keeping this as easy as possible. So the Gemara says the following. So what happens? So Achin, the brothers of the deceased, Kodmin la'achei, come before in the inheritance progression, come before paternal uncles, the uncles of the father, or I should say the brothers of the father of the deceased. Yotze Yerechan Shalachin, if the brothers are the closest inheritors, their children, Kodmin la'achei, the offspring of the brothers of the deceased, come before the paternal uncles. So we'll say, so it says the Mishnah, Zaklal. We'll say, here is the klal. You could already understand it from the Mishnah. Kala kodim and achala. We'll say, whoever has a stronger, or I should say, not stronger, but kodmin, precedence. Thank you. Whoever has precedence in inheritance, we'll say that precedence ultimately, again, that status trickles down to their direct offspring. So called Zakla called Nachodim Nachala, Yotzi Yerecho Kolmin, Va'av Kodim L'chol Yotzi Yerecho. We're going to define exactly what this means. A father comes before any offspring. So also before we get to that, so what the Mishnah is teaching me about is the following. Essentially, that one's position in inheritance is something that is transferred down to their offspring. So we'll say, just to illustrate this again, in the simplest way, Yaakov dies, leaves behind a son and a daughter, Reuven and Dinah. So obviously, again, if Reuven is alive at the time that his father dies, Reuven inherits his father. The more complicated case is Reuven predeceases his father. But Reuven, Baruch Hashem, leaves behind the son Chanoch. Now, when Yaakov dies, Rabosai, who inherits Yaakov? And the answer is Yaakov's grandson from his son Reuven. Not the daughter, but his grandson from his son. Why, Rabbi saying? Because we say that Chanoch inherits his father's inheritance precedence. He inherits his father's inheritance position. That's the great chiddush of the Mishnah. What about this last line? Va'av kodim l'chol yotzi yerecho. Father precedes all the other offspring. But let's take a look at the Rashbam. Va'av kodem liyoresh es beno obito shemesu l'chol yotzi yerecho. Now, this is very interesting. That although we say that the offspring inherits we'll call the inheritance position of their parent, a father's right to inherit comes before or usurps any of the rights of the offspring. So what does this mean? So he says, L'chol yotzi yerecho, dahainu achei hames, ukvar nafkulam bereish perikin, me'avarta da'av kodem la'achin, v'davka miyotzi yerecho. Aval yotzi yerecho shel beno kol mechol. So what does this mean? We're going to see that a father has the right to inherit before brothers. In other words, father has a right to inherit his deceased son before the other living sons have the right to inherit their brother. Again, the grandson of the deceased will still take precedence over the father of the deceased, but once again, if there's no, let's say, children to inherit, so there's no son, there's no offspring of the son, there's no daughter, what happens, we'll say next, inheritance goes where? To the brothers of the deceased. But if there is a father, then really the inheritance goes to the father before it goes to the brothers. Okay, good. Tana Rabbanan. So there must be a chart out there for this. Okay, so we'll track it down. Tana Rabbanan. So we'll say let's go back to Tana Rabbanan. Ben ainli ela ben. So we'll say, remember again, I know that a son goes ahead and inherits, but I only know that it is a position held by the son. How do I know? Ben Ben, when the Torah says that a son inherits, in the Ella Ben, I only know that refers to the son. Ben haben. What about the son of the son? Oh, bas haben, or the daughter of the son. Oh, ben bas haben, or the son of the daughter of the son. Minai. In other words, we'll say what we're asking now here is the following. Midaraisa, I know that a son inherits a father. You Mishnah are teaching me that what? That when that son dies, again, Yaakov is the father, Reuven is the son. I know that when Yaakov dies, Reuven inherits him. Mishnah, you're now teaching me that what? That what? That if Reuven predeceases his father, but Reuven leaves behind a son or a daughter, or for that matter, Reuven himself leaves behind a grandchild. Right? That's what? I'm sorry. I said that right. Right? So now if Reuven predeceases his father, but Reuven's the son, but Reuven leaves behind a son or a daughter, right, who's a grandson or a granddaughter of the deceased, or Reuven leaves behind a grandchild who's a great-grandchild of the deceased, how do I know that those children inherit the Zayda, or their great-grandfather Yaakov, before the daughter or anyone else? Talmud Lomar, Ein Lo. Rabbi say, this is a dramatic drasha. The pasuk says, "Ubein ein lo." Now, one thing you have to understand about ein, which is many times in the Torah, when the Torah uses the word ein, bless you. When the Torah uses the word ein, it's often written chasr without an aleph. Excuse me, without a yud. Here, it's written with a yud. It's written malay. So I'll say generally, when it's written malay, that's usually for drasha purposes. What's the drasha we're making over here? Don't read it ein lo, rather ayin alof. Look into him. Look at it. As well said, the Torah is telling me that even if the son is not in existence, if the son's dead, ayin lo. Look into him. In other words, examine his genealogy and see, did he leave behind any direct offspring? And if he left behind any direct offspring, then einachinami, they will inherit the inheritance position of their now deceased father. So says the Gemara Vayter, Bas. Similarly, Torah tells me that a daughter inherits. But I say, take a look. Yeah, fine. But we're good. So Bas, Torah tells me that a daughter inherits. Ainly alabas. I only know that a daughter inherits. Bas abas. But say, how do I know that if the daughter has a daughter? Let's say again, same case. Yaakov has a daughter. Her name is Dina. So I know that if Yaakov dies and Dina is an only child, that Dina inherits her father. How do I know that if Dina dies, but Dina left behind a son, or I should say a daughter, or Ben, Aini alabas, Bas Abbas. What if Dina left behind a daughter? Uben Abbas, or she left behind a son, Ubas Ben Habas. Or ultimately, again, she went ahead and she left behind a granddaughter, right? The daughter of her son. Then, again, Ubas Ben Abbas, or again, grandson, granddaughter. I mean, how do I know that all of these people inherit the inheritance position of their late mother or grandmother? Talmud Lomar, Ein Lo, Ayin Alav. We'll say same drasha. Because remember, again, this is being learned out from the same pasuk. This word Ben Bas are being learned out, we'll say, from the same pasuk. So, or actually from two consecutive pasukim. But again, Lamaisa, what the Gemara says over here is that in both of these pasukim, Torah used lashon of Ein with a Yud, which tells me Ayin. Look into this person, examine this person's genealogy, and see at the end of the day, are there any other direct descendants? And if there are, then in fact these people will go ahead and inherit the deceased. We'll say Amud Beis. So I'll say, so the Gemara is switching gears here a little bit for just a moment. Take a look at the top Rashbam. So Rashbam says, Kolomar, Vadai, Kiechi darminan ayin alav lemata, hachinami aminan ayin alav lemala. Shimkalo zaro legamre ha'abirena liyarsha av lemala. Ha'keitrat amotzi b'chol mokam elav. So let's listen to this. So the Gemara says, this is actually quite interesting. The Gemara says that I understand now that based on the klal that we've learned, I understand children inherit, and I also understand that the inheritance position of the children of the deceased is inherited by their own offspring. Inherited by their own offspring. So Lamaisa, what the Gemara says over here is, what happens if there's no offspring? The deceased has no offspring. So tell me how it works ultimately again, when you have to see, we've always assumed that the way inheritance works, Rabbi Say, is you want to keep going down the family tree. Let's say the family tree ends at the deceased. So tell me the process ultimately again for going back up the family tree to be able to find the closest surviving relative. To which the Gemara says, HaKetzad, Nachala mimashmeshes v'holeches ad Ruvain. So we'll say ultimately again, you do what you have to learn. You find the closest surviving relative, even if you have to go back to Ruvain. What's the reason you have to go back to Ruvain? Let's assume for a moment that the deceased is from Shevet Ruvain. So the Gemara is saying over here is, you go back and you find the closest surviving relative to the deceased. That's going to be the person who inherits, even if you have to go back to who? To Ruvain himself. I asked the Gemara, what's listen to this? V'leima ad Yaakov. I don't say that. I mean, if you're trying to make a point, that you go back to the closest surviving relative, even if it means going back to Ruvain ben Yaakov, right? Then why not just say go back to Yaakov, right? Meaning why? That's just a stylistic question. Why are you framing it that way as going back to Ruvain? Why not go back to Yaakov? To which also listen to how beautiful this is. Amar Abaye says Gemiri de lo kala shifta. We'll say because again we have a Masorah that there will never be a tribe of Klal Yisrael that ceases to exist. Right? It was an incredible yisod. That there's no such thing ultimately again as a shevet that will ever cease to exist. Now again, could it be that we don't know the whereabouts of certain shvatim? We don't know ultimately again what happened to certain shvatim. We know that's historically true. We don't know. There are 10 shvatim that are lost to us. But Lamais at the end of the day, despite the fact that we don't know where they are, does not mean they do not exist. And they might not know who they are, but it doesn't mean they don't exist. So therefore again, the Gemara ultimately goes up to Ruvain to teach us a side lesson, which is that at the end of the day, again, we go up to Ruvain because, again, there's no such thing as a shevet that will ever cease to exist. Fine. Amarav Huna Amarav. So we'll say fine. So therefore, again, what the Gemara just suggesting, which again is halacha l'maisa. I will say everything we're learning today is halacha l'maisa. So again, in inheritance law, if there are no inheritors, in other words, if the family tree stops at the deceased, you simply back up the process. Now again, the Mishnah gave us the provisions for that as well. You look at the brothers, you look at the father, you look at the father, you look at the brothers, you look at paternal uncles, and again, you keep going back up until you find the closest surviving relative. So the Gemara goes weiter. Amrav Huna. So what's the name of Rav? Kala Omer Tirash Bas Im Bas Haben. Let's say like this. Yaakov had a son Ruvain, and Dinah, son and daughter. So what happens? So Ruvain dies. Ruvain predeceased his father, but Ruvain left behind a granddaughter. We'll call her Sarah. He left behind the granddaughter. So what happens? Now Yaakov dies. So who is in the family of Yaakov? He has two people. He has his daughter Dinah and his granddaughter Sarah. So what does Ruvain leave in his will? Yaakov leaves in his will, Tirosh Bas Im Bas Haben. I want my daughter to share the inheritance with my granddaughter. So Yaakov says, Dinah and Sarah, Dinah my daughter, Sarah my granddaughter, I want you to go ahead and share the inheritance. So says Rav, Afilu Nasi Shebi Yisrael, even if the person who made this statement is an exceptionally important individual, like he's a Nasi in Yisrael, he's the head of Klal Yisrael, Ein Shomin Lo. I will say we do not listen to him. We don't listen to him. She'enon ela ma'aset stukim. Because I will say such a statement is what this is only a ma'aset stukim. I will say, remember again, the stukim were a group of individuals who did not believe in Torah Shabbat Peh. They only believed in Torah Shabbat. So therefore, again, we're going to see they paskin that ultimately, again, a daughter and a granddaughter share equally in Yerusha. Therefore, if a person says that I want my daughter and my granddaughter to share equally in Yerusha, that's ma'aset stukim. That ultimately, again, is like a shtickle heresy. Ve'in shomana. We do not listen to them. So we'll say, where did the stukim come up with this? So the Gemara supposed to, which by the way, we're going to see really comes down to a concept of masna mashakasav b'Torah. We'll say if you go ahead and you make any tanai, you make any condition that runs contrary to Torah law, so lemaisa again, your tanai is batal. Right? Remember again, we learned this in Kiddushin. A man goes in and says to him, man says to his wife, I'm here by Mekudesh, you're Mekudesh on the condition that I have no responsibility towards you. No, I don't have to provide for your physical needs, for your food, for your clothing. So what's the halacha? So Rabbi said the halacha is they're married, right? Good luck with that one, right? They're married, right? So mikudeshes utino batal, right? The mikudeshes, but the tanai is batal, right? Because you can't make a tanai on contrary to Torah law. You can't make a neder not to put on tefillin, right? Because we'll say it doesn't work. There's such a neder like that. So the Gemara thing over here is we're going to see a man goes ahead and says, "Let my granddaughter inherit with my daughter," such as which will say, by the way, just Can't say enough. This is what highlights to us the need for proper halachic estate planning. Because people often want to leave certain things to their children in certain ways, and there are halachic mechanisms to divide up your estate equally amongst your children. But again, if not done right, on a technical level, a person could be in violation of halacha posthumously, which is not a good thing, which is not a good position to be in. So a person has to make sure that if at the end of the day, they want to go ahead and leave certain things to their children in certain ways, that they take the proper steps. So the Gemara goes weiter. So what happens? This is Ma'aseh Tzdukim. Ma'aseh Tzdukim. So the Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara says, where do we see this? Sanya, Ba'arba ve'esrim b'teves, on the 24th of Teves, Tivna l'dinana. So we'll say ultimately again, the halacha was restored to its former state. In other words, Tivna l'dinana means the halacha was restored. What happened? Shayu Tzdukim Omrim, Tzdukim used to say, Tiresh habas im basa ben. Supposed to listen to this. The Tzdukim used to say that a daughter should be able to share in the inheritance with a granddaughter. In other words, we'll say this is a very specific case where again, Yaakov has a son and a daughter, Reuven and Dinah. So Reuven died, left behind the daughter. Then Yaakov dies. So the Tzdukim used to say that Dinah, the daughter, should get to share in the inheritance with the granddaughter, with her niece, with the granddaughter of the deceased, with Sarah. Mitpala and Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai rolled up his sleeves. He got into it with them. Amar lahem shotim minayin zelochem. So he said to them, "You fools, where are you getting this from? Right? Where are you pulling this stuff out of?" So I'll say. So by the way, you also see it's an interesting thing that sometimes again, when dealing with this is often a struggle we have, that a person has to be able to have proper relationships with all types of Jews. At the same time, sometimes when a person sees that there's a risk to the Masorah, a person sees that there is an existential, there's something that could really go wrong for Klal Yisrael, a person has to roll up their sleeves and ultimately stake their ground. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was an incredible Ish HaShalom. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai saved Klal Yisrael. Just so you should know, right? Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is one ultimately, again, remember the famous Ma'asen Gin. He smuggled out of Yerushalayim. He plays dead. He smuggled out. He comes face to face with the man who would be the Roman Emperor Vespasian. He gets Vespasian ultimately again to salvage Yavne v'Chachameha. Again, it was an incredible person. It was an Ish HaShalom. But yet again, when he saw over here a risk to the Masorah of Klal Yisrael, he stakes out his ground. Showed them, "You fools! What are you doing?" Minayin lachem v'lo haya adam shechziro davar. We'll say, and none of the Tzdukim were able to answer up where they got this from. Chutz mizakin echad. We'll say, with the exception of one old man, shey mefatvet kinegdo. So we'll say the old man advanced the following reasons for Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Listen to this. So this is actually great. They get into this back and forth. But Omer, listen to what the old man said. Uma bas beno haba mikoach beno tirashenu. So listen to this. If a granddaughter, meaning the daughter of the son, will inherit her now deceased grandfather, where does that koach come from? Right? That koach comes from her father, the son. So the Gemara says, and she has the ability to inherit. Bito haba'a mikochola kol shekin. So we'll say, so that Tzduki seems to advance a pretty good argument ultimately against Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. And what's the argument that he advances? He says, listen, if a granddaughter has the ability to inherit, and where does her koach to inherit come from? Where does it come from? Her father. So a daughter who has her own power. So we're supposed to think about it like this. Does a granddaughter have her own inherent power of inheritance? No. The Pashtos, no. She doesn't have any inherent power of inheritance. In other words, she inherits the power of her father. So her father, the now deceased Reuven, was a first position inheritor vis-a-vis the estate of his father, Yaakov. Her father, Reuven, died, so now she inherits her father. She doesn't have her own rights. She inherits her father's rights. It says that to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, if a granddaughter who inherits the rights of her father stands to inherit the deceased grandfather, Yaakov, so then Dinah, Rabbi say who what? Dinah, who has an inherent right of inheritance, should certainly inherit alongside her niece, the granddaughter of the deceased. Karlav Amikrazeh. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, I'm going to tell you wrong. I'm going to tell you. We'll say what Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is going to do is the following. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is going to quote a pasuk from Bereshis, where he's going to show that on a biblical level, grandchildren can have the same standing as children themselves. Watch this. So Eila b'nei Seir, we'll say, this is actually an interesting pasuk. Eila b'nei Seir achori, Yoshvei haaretz. So we'll say, these are the children of Seir. Who are the children of Seir? Lotan, Shoval, Tzivon, Ana. So we'll say, those are the 4 children of Seir. Lotan, Shoval, Tzivon, Ana. Okay, watch this. What does the next pasuk say? We'll say this 4 pasukim later. Ve'eila b'nei Tzivon. So we'll say, so we spoke about the children of Seir. Now there's the children of Tzivon. Who are the children of Sivon? So the Gemara says, Aya va'ana. So we'll say, who are the children of Sivon? Ay and Ana. So we'll say, you see the problem, right? You see the problem? In the first pasuk, Ana is called a brother of Sivon. And in the second pasuk, Ana is called a son of Sivon. What's going on over here? Ela melamed shebat Sivon al imo v'holid Ana. We'll say, rather, what happened? Sivon engaged in an act of incest with his mother, and what? And ultimately, again, they had Ana. So we'll say, so in essence, what's happening over here? Ana is both what? Is both Sivon's brother as well as his son. Okay? Might be good trivia, Shabbos table trivia. Right? So again, so he's both, right? He's both, right? But make sure there are no kids there, right? So again, it's both his brother and his son. So we'll say, but what do you see from here? What do you see from here? You see from here that the way ultimately, again, Ana is reckoned as B'nai Seir. So you see from here, Abba said that ultimately, again, grandchildren, meaning on a technical level, he could be both a son to Seir and a grandson to Seir. Yet you see that he's reckoned as a grandson to Seir. He's reckoned as a son to Seir. Which tells you, Abba say, ultimately, again, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's entire point over here is just to show that grandchildren can have the same standing as children themselves. Says me 1 second. Maybe there are just 2 guys named Ana. In other words, I don't understand why you have to have this narrative of incest with the mother. Why don't you just say there are 2 guys named Ana? To which the Gemara says, Amrabba Amina Milsadullah Amra Shabar Malka. So Rabbi says, I'm going to give you an answer that even Shabar Malka never said. I will say, who's Shabar Malka? I will say, now we know who Shabar Malka is. King Shapur was one of the Persian kings. But listen to this. So Rabbi is going to say, I'm going to tell you a drasha that even Shabar Malka never said. Shkoyach. How many drashas does Shabar Malka say? Who is the Shabar Malka? Manu? Shmuel. I will say, Shmuel was often called King Shapur, Shabar Malka. Why is he called King Shabar Malka? Because we'll say, the same way that the words of the king are final and authoritative, so too the words of Shmuel were final and authoritative. And what did Shmuel say? Or others say, Amra Papa Amina Milsallah Amra Shabar Malka Amana Rabba. Others say, no, will say that it was Papa who said it, and he said, I'm going to tell you words of Shabar Malka. Who was Shabar Malka? That was Rabba. Because Rabba's words were authoritative. Amra Kra, I will say, bottom line, what did they say? Amra Kra, Hu Ano. But so when the pasuk identifies Ana, it says Hu Ana. He is Ana. But say why the need to add in that Hu? Hu Ana de Meikara. The Gemara says ultimately again that it's the same Ana. Lest you think that it's a different Ana in the first pasuk, a different Ana in the second pasuk. It's Hu Ana. It's the same Ana. But so therefore teaching us what? Therefore teaching us that Lamaisa again. The Maisa grandchildren have the same standing as children. Amrle, so we'll say, so this is what Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai answers the Tztuki. Amrle, Rebbe, Bekacha ta potrani. Really, and essentially he says, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, like, that's the best you got? That's the best you got? You're quoting me from a pasuk of genealogies from Bereshis, that grandchildren have the same standing as children, and therefore, again, the granddaughter of the deceased son should be the sole inheritor. Amarlo, Shota. So again, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says, you fool, Katap of Koftas Zayin, Velo Tehei Torah Shalema Shalano Kisicha Batela Shalachem. Ultimately, again, the Zarathustra, we'll see, no, actually we're going to stop over here. We'll pick up, I know I'm leaving you on a little bit of a cliffhanger, but we'll pick up ultimately again Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's retort to the Tztuki, and Mirat Hashem B'Shatom Mitzlachos tomorrow. Shkoyach. Shota. Twice a Shota.